When I first became aware of Beyond Light and found out we'd be heading to the Deep Stone Crypt, one of the first places my mind went was CAYDE-1'S. I knew he wouldn't and probably shouldn't be revived, but maybe we would uncover some more backstory on his creation and what happened in those early days on Europa. Today we're going to take a look at what CAYDE-1 was like thanks to some new information, dive into the reason CAYDE became an EXO, see what Ghost has to say about his revival, and much more. The big debate, should CAYDE be brought back to life? Now if you'd like to learn more on that subject in its entirety, definitely check out this video right here. To summarize though, CAYDE shouldn't be brought back to life and won't. This is unless Bungie gets desperate down the line for the story and pulls some crazy plot twist. CAYDE shouldn't be brought back to life, he died for a reason in Forsaken. Now Ghost puts it perfectly in some of Beyond Light's new dialogue. CAYDE wouldn't be the same, there would be no point in bringing him back because he'd just be another EXO with a brand new slate, it wouldn't be CAYDE.
These are what Clovis Bray called memory banks, digital recordings of people's minds. It's how they became EXOs. That means any EXO's past could be here, even CAYDE. I know he didn't want to come back, but I do miss him. Even if we could bring him back, he wouldn't be our CAYDE. He'd be a blank slate again. Rest in peace, buddy.
CAYDE, like all EXO candidates, was human at one point and was a soldier with some debt over his head. Now while it wasn't really described what this debt was, we know that Clovis Bray approached CAYDE and basically said, hey, come to Europa, participate in my program, and all that debt, gone. So that's what human CAYDE did. He came to Europa and the next thing he remembers is being converted into an EXO. Whether he agreed to this or it was against his will is unsure, at least to me. Like maybe he agreed but he didn't know what Clovis was actually going to do, and we know that Clovis unwillingly made people EXOs previously. But from that point, we never really know what happened directly after his conversion. We knew that he was later stationed as a security guard to Maya Sundaresh and the Ishtar teams and stuff like that, possibly on Venus, and then he had all those encounters with Taniks and then became the Hunter Vanguard. But what happened right after CAYDE became an EXO and what was he doing there on Europa? We've talked about Mika Abrams in a previous video in the story of how all the penguins got spread around Europa, but take a listen to one of the lore cards here from that book where Mika Abrams has their first encounter with an EXO. So Mika is around 10 years old, and in this card they are heading to school so they can learn. They have to cross Europa, stay in underground buildings, but on this day they decided to take a field trip to the surface where there's snowsuits and just observe the environment. So Mika decides to stray away and try and find her parents who are working on the EXO program at some factory. That's when I decided I'd learn more useful stuff over at the EXO factory with Papa and Dad. I didn't break the rules, the factory was in sight, plus I had two buddies, Mihalova and Calumet. I knew I couldn't go in the front door without a badge, so I went around the side to a loading bay where two EXOs were unloading a bunch of crates. They looked like they were almost done, so I hid under the dock to wait for them to leave. Instead, I heard one of them sit down. I'm taking a break. Need to or not, this is when we used to have lunch. I refused to work through lunch. And the other one said, I miss lunch. I miss getting hungry. Then the first one replied with this weird tone. So you would say you're hungry for hunger? Which made them laugh for a long time. When they finally stopped, the second EXO said, what do you tell that shrink, by the way? You tell him about the whisper? That's when I wanted to leave. I didn't like them making fun of Dad, plus the way they talked about food and dreams, it made me feel sick. So sick that I guess I made a noise because then I heard, "What was that?" So I ran. I heard shouts behind me, footsteps catching up, a bang and a sizzle right over my head. Then two cold hard claws snatched me up. That's when I looked straight into its glowing blue eyes. So that's a pretty interesting card. This was Mika's first encounter with an Exo, which left him terrified, and then the Exo fell over when discussing a whisper and things like that, possibly the long slow whisper. So that would be pretty scary, right? You're on this new planet, you've never met the thing that most of the adults are working on in the Exos. They're creating a brand new robot, putting a human brain into that robot. It's kind of weird, and your first encounter goes like this with a shot ringing out over your head. Now, if you've had the chance to obtain the Legacy's Oath Helm from the Deepstone Crypt raid, or you've looked at the lore yourself, this next card is pretty interesting. High above the last city, tucked in one of the tower's many alcoves, CAYDE-1'S thumbs through an old book. Plucked from the speaker's library, it's become delicate with age, or so he assumes, taking extra care turning each page. His sense of touch is good. There's certainly enough circuitry in his metal fingers to pull out the most precise of shots, but even a hair trigger touch might rip the brittle paper. CAYDE pauses on a page. If sailor tales and sailor tunes, storm and adventure, heat and cold, suddenly a gust of surprisingly icy wind nearly rips the book from CAYDE's hands. To hell with this godforsaken ice cube, he shouts, almost falling from his perch. He steadies himself and inhales deeply. Hang on there, CAYDE. You're not on an icy cube, godforsaken or otherwise. You're on Earth, in the last city. But the memory lingers like the floating neon outline seconds after the blinding camera flash, the snow-white plains of a distant moon, a sarcophagus of ice and iron. Yes, that's what Europa feels like to CAYDE-1 as he loads crate after crate onto the bay outside the Exoscience factory. Even the sky had turned a flat gray, casting all beneath it in dull, deadening light. A warning sky, he thinks. Sailors had some kind of rhyme for it, didn't they? Either way, it hardly makes for a motivating work environment. CAYDE sits in one of the crates. "I'm taking a break," he announces. "Need to or not, this is when I used to have lunch, and I refuse to work through lunch." Next to him, Nox 4 sighs with relief and longing. "I miss lunch. I miss getting hungry." CAYDE grins as much as his mechanical face will allow. He intones in his best Dr. Abrams impression. "So you would say, you're hungry for hunger?" Nox bursts into guffaws. CAYDE chuckles weakly. It wasn't that funny, but as his friend's laughter grows, so does CAYDE's. Soon they're both clutching each other and howling. Then, gradually, their cheer fades. "What do you tell that shrink, by the way?" Nox asks. "You tell him about the whisper?" CAYDE shakes his head. Before he can snark about the uselessness of psychologists, the whisper rings in his metal skull. "It's red sky in the morning, sailor's warning, but you are no sailor." A whimper squeaks out from the loading bay. A moment later, a short snow-suited figure scrambles out, racing for the far end of the factory. CAYDE and Nox shout, taking after the eavesdropper. No sharpshooter yet, CAYDE fumbles through his Braytech-issued hand cannon, aims shakily, and bang. CAYDE-6 comes back to himself just as he stumbles into his hideout. He rifles through the piles of loot until, aha, he finds a pen. CAYDE-6 isn't done yet. He flips open the book, no longer being careful with the pages, and starts scrawling. Spend time with an Exo who's been through it like we have, and you'll see all the tells. So this card is great and reveals who those Exos were that Mika was interacting with. First, CAYDE is in the last safe city, probably in a tower, reading some speaker's book, and then he has this flashback. But before he does, he says the memory lingers like the floating neon outline seconds after the blinding camera flash, the snow-white plains of a distant moon, a sarcophagus of ice and iron. And CAYDE used those exact words in his Taken King book, where he described where he was taken to become an Exo, to become something new. So yeah, this is CAYDE-1. He couldn't really use his handgun. He wasn't the sharpshooter we know him as CAYDE-6. and he and Nox 4 are just sort of laughing about the whole situation with Dr. Abrams, which is Mika's father, the kid who is watching them, and CAYDE has these weird sort of blinding moments when thinking about that whisper. So from that point in the letter 6, we learn that the Exo actually caught up to Mika and lifted him up where they looked eye to eye. And then Mika explains how they were scared and it was spooky looking into the Exo's eyes like that. And then they say all of a sudden its eyes went dark and I fell to the ground. A second later it collapsed in a sparking metal heap next to me. So we don't know 100% what happened to CAYDE here, but something made him corrupted for a moment and fall over into that pile of sparks. So did CAYDE know too much already and Clovis caught wind and decided to reboot him here? Did Dr. Abrams know about this, that he was chasing after Mika and sort of disabled him for a second? Or did the darkness and clarity cause this vision with the whisper situation? Also, a cool little side note, I believe the book that CAYDE picked up and began to read near the speaker's stuff was actually the Treasure Island book by Robert Stevenson. This book was written in 1881 and is set on ships sailing the ocean with pirates searching for gold. So it's pretty cool that CAYDE, a futuristic type character hundreds of years in the future, has a novel from the old world many years ago. Perhaps that's why the paper is so brittle. Also, CAYDE's book from the Taken King Collector's Edition was also called CAYDE's Treasure Island book. So not sure if this is a nod to it by the writers at Bungie, but also pretty cool. Anyway, Guardians, that's all I got for today's video on CAYDE-1. I hope we get some more information on the future of what CAYDE was like back then and some of the events that took place right after he became an Exo, but for now it seems like this is all we've got. If you'd like to see videos on a certain lore topic, let me know down below, and please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. My name's Evade, and I'll catch you Guardians in the next one.